Good afternoon, I'm Katie Wilson and you are watching A News. Let's see your headlines. Iran and Israel ceasefire appears to be holding after days of violence and a direct intervention from the US. US airstrikes did not destroy Iran's nuclear capability, according to a preliminary assessment. Leaders of NATO countries meet in The Hague for a high-stakes summit. The US brokered ceasefire has restored a sense of calm in the Middle East, but whether it holds remains uncertain. It follows an angry intervention by US President Donald Trump, who earlier accused both sides of violating the truce.
The ceasefire between Israel and Iran appears to be holding, at least for now, following days of escalating violence and a direct intervention by US President Donald Trump. Both governments have publicly acknowledged that a ceasefire is in effect after 12 days of intense airstrikes, marking the most serious military confrontation between the two regional arch-rivals in recent history. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu described the opening strike of Israel's Rising Lion operation as historic, claiming it will be studied by militaries around the world. Yet he made clear that the broader campaign against what he called Iran's axis of terror is far from over. He reiterated Israel's goals, defeating Hamas and securing the return of hostages from Gaza.
Dear citizens of Israel, during the 12 days of the Operation Rising Lion, we achieved a historic victory, and this victory will stand for generations. We removed from upon us two immediate existential threats: the threat of annihilation by nuclear bombs and the threat of annihilation by 20,000 ballistic missiles. If we had not acted now, the state of Israel would soon be facing the danger of annihilation. But that did not happen, because at the decisive moment we rose like a lion, stood tall, and our roar shook Tehran and echoed throughout the world.
Iran, for its part, accused Israel of continuing to breach the ceasefire with drone incursions and targeted attacks. A spokesman for the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps warned that hostilities could resume if violations persist.
We warn America and the Israel of the crushing blows of the brave Islamic fighters from the north to the south of the occupied territories, and of the strike on the American base in Al Udeid, which should serve as a lesson. Otherwise, in the next phase, they will face an even more powerful response, with broader targets already designated.
Trump, who brokered the deal, announced the ceasefire early Tuesday. Hours later, he sharply criticised both sides for initial violations. Despite mutual claims of victory, the tone on both sides suggests a pause rather than peace. In Tehran, crowds gathered in Engelab Square in a show of support for the armed forces. While in Israel, Armed Forces Chief of Staff Eyal Zami said the military was at the conclusion of a significant chapter, but the campaign against Iran is not over.
Well, to discuss the economic impact of the Israel-Iran conflict, we are joined by Ricardo Evangelista, Chief Executive of Active Trades. Thank you for being with us. Now, can you talk me through how far-reaching the economic impact of this conflict has been?
Hi, good afternoon. Yes, it's been a regional conflict with a global impact. So we've seen oil prices were affected by this. Also, risk appetites, more generally speaking, in the financial markets was also suffering. We saw stock indices falling in the early days of the conflict after Israel attacked Iran on June 13, and this has now somehow changed. So what was a negative impact in the early days of the conflict between Israel and Iran has now become a positive development, if you want, as the markets sort of experience some relief after the tension that dominated for a couple of weeks. So what we're seeing right now is that the Nasdaq index reached a new all-time high today. Also, other stock indices are also rising. Oil prices fell by about 17% since yesterday.
So Ricardo, was it the ceasefire that created that positive impact?
I think the whole thing was to some degree was sort of was pre-planned. We saw that the attack on the American airbase was a choreographed reaction where there was a warning given by Iran on the US, and the US had enough time to move all the planes off the runways. So everything has been somehow choreographed in order for Iran not to lose face here. And I think for the US, there's also an interest in a more peaceful resolution, because no one wants a crisis in the Gulf where the Strait of Hormuz is closed and oil prices rise as a consequence, because that will then have an impact on inflation, will force the hand of central banks, will, for example, force the Fed to keep interest rates high for longer. So the US is not interested in continuing. Also, Israel is running out of defense missiles for their Iron Dome. So all the parts were interested in bringing this to a halt, and the financial markets saw it all coming. So when Iran attacked the US airbase in Qatar, what happened was, instead of oil prices rising, we saw that oil prices started coming down quite abruptly. So I think what happened here was the outcome that everybody was pretty much expecting. So everybody did their part, and now we are experiencing some relief in the financial markets.
Really interesting to get your insight there. Thank you so much for joining us on the programme.
It was my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Now, Iran's parliament has voted to suspend cooperation with the International Atomic Energy Agency, citing security concerns over its nuclear sites. Iran's parliament stated the move will remain in place until the security of nuclear sites is guaranteed, adding that Iran's nuclear programme will continue to advance. Meanwhile, IAEA chief Rafael Grossi says his top priority is to send inspectors to Iran's nuclear sites to assess the damage from the strikes and to verify stocks of enriched uranium, much of which he believes survived the attacks. Donald Trump is doubling down on claims that US strikes on Iran obliterated the country's nuclear facilities. That's despite a preliminary damage assessment from the president's own intelligence agency, which was leaked to the media, suggesting that the airstrikes didn't destroy Iran's nuclear capabilities and may have only set the program back by a few months. Tony Waterman has more from Washington.
These certainly aren't the headlines President Trump was hoping to make while at the NATO summit in the Netherlands. He was hoping to take a victory lap after those surprise airstrikes this past weekend. In his words, completely and totally obliterated Iran's key nuclear enrichment facilities. But he's instead been left defending those claims after this leaked U.S. intelligence report found that key components of Iran's nuclear program, like centrifuges and highly enriched uranium, are still largely intact, and that Iran's ability to build a nuclear weapon was likely set back by only a few months. The assessment also reportedly found that those bunker-busting bombs didn't cause as much damage as expected, something that Israeli intelligence has also concluded. When asked about this assessment by reporters, Trump tried to cast doubt on the U.S. intelligence, saying that it was inconclusive, that he believes it was total obliteration, and he insisted that Iran's nuclear program has been set back by decades. Trump's team, including the U.S. Defense Secretary, have claimed that this is all politically motivated, that the leaked report is meant to, in their words, demean President Trump and discredit the brave fighter pilots who conducted this mission. And it's important to remember that this is just a preliminary report by just one of the many branches of the U.S. intelligence apparatus, and it's mostly based on aerial satellite images. There aren't agents on the ground jumping into those holes left by the bombs to assess the internal damage at these facilities. So it's still very early in this damage assessment, and things could certainly change going forward. Tony Waterman for A News, Washington.
And for the latest on the NATO summit in The Hague, we are joined live by our correspondent, Anita Sharma. Anita, hi. What can you tell us about the latest developments from the event?
Oh, there's just a lot of moving parts here, Katie. It's a two-day summit, and of course, it's been full of pomp and circumstance, right from a fashionably late U.S. President Donald Trump arriving last night, and his first stop wasn't the NATO summit. It was an extravagant dinner, if you will, with the King and Queen of the Netherlands. Of course, other heads of state were there for the dinner this morning. There was also a breakfast at the Royal Palace. And then here on to the NATO summit, where we learned from the Secretary General, Mark Rutte, that there's a full plenary, if you will, a full schedule of events taking place with various leaders. We know that the president of Turkey, Erdogan, had met with U.S. President Donald Trump. They had a 30-minute discussion, and there was a promise there to basically strengthen ties, especially in that region, to basically keep Turkey in a strong position. So Erdogan, as well as Trump, had that discussion going on. And Trump also told us, the press, that he would be meeting, he was open to meeting with the Ukrainian President, Volodymyr Zelenskyy, later today. So we're waiting to hear the developments of what happened in that meeting. Katie, that's going to be a very significant meeting because those two gentlemen have not met since the Pope Francis funeral in the Vatican back in April. This will be their first face-to-face meeting. And you may recall 4 months ago, they had a rather tense meeting, I'll call it, at the Oval Office, where Trump really came down on Zelenskyy with respect to the Russia-Ukraine war. So let's see what happens on that front. You know better than anyone else that that is a very unpredictable situation. So we'll have more details on that, hopefully in the moments to come. But here we are on the second day, the fullest day of NATO with U.S. President Donald Trump here. I just stepped out of a press conference with the Secretary General, Mark Rutte, and he once again reiterated there were a lot of questions about how vested the United States is in NATO. And Mark Rutte said, you essentially have nothing to worry about. He said, you to the press and you to the world, as well as you to the NATO allies, that if there was any questions or concerns about how committed the United States is, given all the back and forth we've seen with the defense spending pushes, he says the U.S. is 100% backing NATO.
Thanks so much for joining us, Anita. I'm sure you'll keep us posted on the rest of the summit.
Absolutely. Great to see you, Katie. Thank you.
Now, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy strongly condemned the Russian missile strike on the city of Dnipro on Tuesday. The attack killed 17 people and injured almost 300 others, including passengers on a train and children. Speaking to the Dutch Parliament in The Hague, Zelenskyy said that since the beginning of the war, Moscow has used nearly 29,000 Iranian-made drones.
Many homes were affected, schools were damaged, and people were hurt. Even a passenger train was hit as it was simply following its route. The missile exploded right next to it. One way or another, life itself is the main target of these attacks, each one showing the true nature of Putin's war.
Let's hear more about that deadly Russian missile attack on Dnipro yesterday, which struck civilian infrastructure and a passenger train.
At least 17 people have been killed and almost 300 others injured following a Russian missile attack on the Ukrainian city of Dnipro. Authorities say the strike ignited a large fire and caused damage to civilian infrastructure and a passenger train. Residents say they took cover in bomb shelters.
I was not at home. Thank God I was not at home, and my child was not at home. My child was in the kindergarten in the shelter, and I was next door.
I was in the 4th hospital, treating my leg. I had a doctor's appointment, and here were the children. They saw it all. Now they're in the 72nd school. There's a bomb shelter there. They ran there.
This attack comes as other Russian attacks were reported in the cities of Samar, which left 2 people dead, and Sumy, which killed 3 people, including an 8-year-old boy. Authorities report that 3 more people were injured. Emergency response teams have been dispatched to the affected area, where a fire is reported to have broken out.
Armenian security forces have raided homes targeting opposition supporters following claims of a foiled coup attempt. Police reportedly searched properties linked to the Armenian Pan-National Unity Party, founded by fugitive ex-official Migran Pogosyan. Local opposition figure Sevak Khachatryan said several residents were taken in for questioning. The investigative committee said it had disrupted an unconstitutional plot to seize power. Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan blamed criminal, oligarchic and clerical circles for what he called a massive and despicable attempt to destabilise the country. The National Bank of Georgia has increased the country's international reserves by over $613 million since the start of the year. That's according to the bank's latest update. In May alone, more than $245 million were added through interventions on the B-Match platform. Total reserves reached $4.6 billion by the end of May. The National Bank of Georgia says growing reserves is vital for maintaining macroeconomic stability. The next update on foreign exchange operations will be published on July 25th. A French territory in the Caribbean is at the heart of a major international conference. Guadeloupe's independence movement is gaining momentum, and this time the call for decolonisation is coming from Baku. A News' Aria Fati has more.
International delegates have gathered here in Baku for a major conference focused on Guadeloupe and the wider issue of decolonisation. The conference is shining a spotlight on Guadeloupe, which is a French overseas territory in the Caribbean that many here say still lives under colonial rule. The event, organised by the Baku Initiative Group, has brought together political leaders, legal experts and activists from across the global south. Delegates from Guadeloupe say that the island, governed by France, faces serious inequalities and lacks true political freedom.
Not living our life, we're living French people's life, and they're not just with us. So we live in a lot of injustice, and we need our freedom. We need to take care of ourselves.
Here we heard harrowing testimonies of colonial crimes, work exploitation, and stories of how administrative and economic structures that remain to this day perpetuate colonialism in Guadeloupe. Now, the delegates today are calling for international recognition of their right to self-determination, whether that's through referendums, reparations, and a shift away from control in Paris.
We have come here in this conference to say precisely that exit subterfuges of colonization, such as integration into becoming French citizens, is not absolutely decolonization. For us, decolonization is full sovereignty.
For Azerbaijan, it's an opportunity to play a larger role in global decolonization debates. In recent months, Baku has hosted a series of forums aimed at supporting territories still under foreign administration. A memorandum was signed here between the Baku Initiative Group and the International Guadeloupe Movement for Reparations. Guadeloupe rarely gets this level of international attention, but today in Baku, it's center stage, alongside broader calls to end colonial legacies still shaping lives in the Caribbean, Africa, and the Pacific. The discussions are expected to continue, with delegates hoping to build momentum and push for stronger international backing for Guadeloupe's cause.
That's all we have for now. Thank you for watching and stay tuned to A News.